Hello. Well, welcome to the Brian Seth Hurst Story World.
Mike Manello asked me, he said, do you think that people at this conference understand the concept of story worlds?
It's a very good question.
So, a story world, I set this out as an introduction, a story world. You're all familiar with Star Trek, and if you're not, then I don't know what rock you've been living under, but you know the rules and the canons of Star Trek. A story world functions on canons. You know the world they live in, the characters, how they relate to one another, and in Star Trek's case, everyone understands the prime directive of non-interference. And because the story world of Star Trek was so well defined, it allowed Star Trek to continue to live on in what you would call franchising, in comic books, in television shows, in movies, in games, because the world was so well defined. Avatar, the world of Avatar was really, really well defined by James Cameron. However, when they went to build the game of Avatar, James Cameron was not directly involved, and the rules of the story world were broken, which is why, in my humble opinion, the game was not successful. So when you create extensions or multi-platform, you have to remain true to the story world. And so more and more, audiences want to insert themselves inside those story worlds. And one thing that I started to get at yesterday in our panel with the digital chiefs was that the audience is so rich and so deep, and there are many levels it communicates on, but there's this undercurrent, this sea change of fandom. And I think that the acknowledgement of us saying the audience is doing more than listening, they are acting, they are becoming the interactors in the story worlds that we create for them. And I tend to be a little bit ahead of my time, as you know. And so some of this may not make sense right away, but in a year it will make sense. We did a story on the future of storytelling for Intel, a study, and there were some really interesting things revealed in that study. And one of them was, as you and I have discussed, that in traditional media, a person like Tim Kring or J.J. Abrams or Dan Harmon, they don't hold the rights to what they create. So they're not able to interact with the audience in the way they want to. And you know, I've worked with Tim for the last 5 years. No one understands the zeitgeist of the audience better than he does, and to be constrained. So I think the storytellers are about to declare their independence.
Well, I'll be interested to see what happens with Dan Harmon, with all of the blogs that were going on with him.
You know, we have a meeting tomorrow, Friday.
Well, that's a whole other longer discussion. But it is true that if you were familiar with that TV show, Community, he was fired by NBC, correct?
So Dan was the showrunner. He created Community, and in this season, he was let go from his own show.
Right. So
and was very vocal about it. The first time you've ever seen someone say, hey, I was fired from my own show, just look up Dan Harmon blog post and you'll see it. And to me, that's indicative of a trend. And so storytellers, you know, power to the storyteller.
All right, well, let's stop there, because I think the point that you are making, and that it will help us transition to the next point that I would like to make, which is not only just how to create a story world and the economics and the ecosystem around a story world, but to what extent does the person who creates the story world need to stay with that and lead it? Do they have to be guided by the studio system where they're stopped from doing what they want to do? Because building a story world takes time, and it takes some visionary thinking, and it takes outside the box thinking these days. The economics of the interactive multi-platform story world experience requires leaping beyond perhaps even the studio system today. Is that possible? Is that a necessary thing in order to create a story world in today's environment where there are so many platforms and so many things to do? Can the studio system, here's my question, can the studio system really effectively create a story world anymore? Or do you have to have somebody jumping outside of that system to do it?
It will adapt. It has to for its survival, and television will not die. and I don't want it to die. But you, as savvy executives, as digital natives begin to populate the executive ranks, then you'll see that adaptation. So in a case of Heroes, that story world was built. Tim worked really hard. He didn't have the rights to the story world afterwards. And so when Heroes was taken off the air, it could have been monetized. It could have lived in graphic novels, in animation, in fan fiction, in user-generated content. And you have to think outside of the box to be able to assign value to the audience. And the audience is sitting there and they're waiting for content and they want to create content. When you talk about the story, the creator of the story world having the freedom to do that, you're right, they're constrained. So I want to take a left for a second. There are essentially 4 levels of conversation between the storyteller and the audience. And the studios and the networks aren't aware of those levels, but the storytellers are.
Number 1?
Number 1 is broadcast. We call it here's the story. And simply, if I'm the storyteller or the content rights holder or the network, I don't care necessarily what you're saying. I just look at the ratings. And that model is fast falling away because you have companies now providing conversational data and all the social analytics.
The actual broadcasting of the content is becoming less of a priority than the action and activity around that content?
I would say the conversation is no longer one way, which leads down to the second level, which is, so the first level being here's the story, the second level is I'm listening. I call this the John Chu model because John, who did Never Say Never and now G.I. Joe, John engages in conversation with his audiences through Twitter and Facebook. So his editing of Never Say Never was based on knowing what that audience wants and what's important to them.
So it's responding to your audience?
Yes, by listening, not getting into deep conversation.
Number 3?
My world, and welcome to it. I call this the Tim Kring world. And that is where you provide what we call participation gateways, where the audience can participate. And in the case of Heroes, which I think really, if I were teaching, I would make Heroes a case study, because Heroes was built off of the behavior of the audience. The one reason I believe that Bravo is so incredibly successful is what they do is because they design with the audience and not for the audience.
What do you mean by with?
With is a collab. You see the audience as collaborators. You're not imposing your ideas on the audience. You are watching their behavior and you are drafting off of their behavior. It's what Apple did to music.
But is that before they act or responding to them after they act?
It's both. So it depends what you're marketing. This can get really complicated, but so you can seed before a show within a community that has a special interest that is addressed by that show. Sci-fi is a great example. Some lifestyle brands, great example. But with Heroes, they basically watched what the consumer did, what the audience did. So in the first season of Heroes, user-generated content, user sites, fan sites, were running 3-to-1 against official content. By the end of the series, everything was under the NBC tent. So they watched what users did, and then they responded, and they gave them more of what they wanted. If you have the last season Heroes DVD, there's an amazing clip that talks about how they responded. So the viewers wanted more graphic novels, so NBC created more graphic novels. Now, you can monetize the area around that and support this, but this is, we are on the great frontier, and Lisa, Lisa Shaw, she is able to experiment, and so I'm always watching what they're doing because the story world can exist in reality television just like it can exist in fiction, drama, and comedy. So the idea of being able to open the story world to the participation of the users, then they come in and they populate it, and they really do. This is the whole thing about Mad Men when they tweeted it, when the audience tweeted his Mad Men characters, and the network tried to shut them down, and it was a public relations nightmare, and the next day they came back because that's what the audience wants to do. And you basically, if you want the audience to stay with your program, you're going to have to give them these opportunities to participate.
But they're not influencing the show. They're interacting, they're tweeting, so Bravo is watching what they're saying.
It depends on the storyteller.
To the show.
It depends on the storyteller.
Okay.
If you watch, if the data shows and the conversation shows that people love one character and really love one character, you may give that character more to do. You may give them a different storyline. You know,
but is Lisa Shaw at Bravo able to be that flexible and that fast?
I think you'd have to that fast.
She should be here to answer that.
I think
yes.
Well, you'd have to ask her. The thing is everyone is looking for a one size fits all answer to how to do multi-platform interactive storytelling. And to me, I mean, I thought the the discussion before mine, I really wanted to get into some deep questioning. I wish it had been an hour long, because the question of how people behave with content in Storyworld and each other, nobody is really doing research into that. And I think that, you know, the way people behave with content is unique to the content that the story that's being told. And when a story resonates, people want to be a part of it. First they talk about it, and those levels. So first it's broadcast, then there's I'm listening, then there's here's the story, then finally there's
What's
take
four?
it.
Yeah. Four.
Yeah. The third level being my world, welcome to it. The final level is take it, it's yours. I call this the Eric Kripke model. And
They're what?
Eric Kripke.
Why?
Because any fans of Supernatural here?
One.
Well, I'll tell you something. If you want to study the future of what's going to happen with content and fans and interaction, study Supernatural. Those fans were rabid, and they created what's called an AU, alternate universe. I feel like Mike separated at birth from Mike Manello, because everything I'm talking about is Mike's world and he lives in. But creating an alternate universe where they're taking the characters, they're giving them storylines. If you don't give the fans an opportunity to do that, they'll just take it themselves. But what Eric did was he took fans established some canon on their own. And he took a piece of that unofficial canon and incorporated it into the official canon. And the fans went wild. They were acknowledged. They were like, you're part of my world, you're part of the story, you know. And it wasn't that the fans were injecting themselves into the story. They were owning the story. And the most successful brands and successful stories today are ones that fans feel they own.
How
And
much
by the way,
time-
that's called pulling a Kripke now. There's an official
Oh, yeah.
term. When you take fan canon and make it official canon, it's called pulling a Kripke.
How much time was there between the building a separate canon amongst the viewers and building that into the actual show? What was the delay
Well, there
between
were
those two things?
five seasons, I think 5 seasons of Supernatural, but this happened over time. And
So,
the fan
the
community,
next year, the next season?
I think in year 3 it probably got very active. But the episode where the fans were completely acknowledged, and I think I spoke of this yesterday, that you can find it on YouTube. It's called The Monster at the End of the Book.
Say that again?
The Monster at the End of the Book. And it is the most amazing demonstration of the collaboration between the audience and the creator of the story world, where the audience is completely acknowledged by the characters in the show. And it was brilliant. And one thing, I don't know what NBC will do with Revolution, but you have J.J. Abrams and Eric Kripke, 2 master storytellers with huge fan bases. That audience is going to be super, super active. The question we can ask is, will NBC know how to manage that audience, what to do with that audience, and how to give them the content? Tim Kring says it's impossible to feed the beast, so you have to rely on the audience to create content and create conversation.
It's interesting this time when there are so many more devices, so many ways to get distracted on YouTube and all the other amazing sites where you can get great content, that it's almost like there's this chariot, you know, in Ben-Hur, where you have to control the horses, because the studios have to deliver that kind of content, deliver a social TV experience. They might lose these people, but so what? I'm not sure I'm making sense.
No, you are, but you can't
how
control.
Can the broadcasters, are they being? So here's my question.
You have to
Are
hold
they
the
being
reins of the horses
successful?
lightly.
Yeah, but how are the broadcasters able to be successful in a multi-platform universe to deliver this social TV experience to a increasingly segmented market? Are they being successful statistically?
Okay,
Are they
so
able
I
to serve a social TV experience to the audience who's still watching broadcast TV, or is the social TV experience that's happening outside of the network environment competing or still at a low level?
Okay, so the first thing
does
is,
everybody understand my question?
I would
Just
say,
nod your head. I'll accept that.
I
Okay.
would say in their way they can respond. But Roger Knoll, professor at Stanford, says it's never the incumbents that come up with the new business models. Apple reinvented the music industry, and they did it by institutionalizing radical behavior. They took illegal downloading behavior and they made it cool and they made it fun. The change will come, first of all, from the liberation of storytellers. So a new ecosystem is emerging where technology companies like Intel, like Toshiba, and other OEMs like Nokia will start to act like studios to fund content so that that content can live and exploit the capabilities of the platforms that those technologies have. The storytellers will be free to hold on to their IP. They will collaborate in informed collaboration with the technology companies and with the audience to deliver experience that the audience loves. This will run in parallel to traditional television. And then the media companies will go and they will buy those new companies. But you look at Smosh, Alloy Smosh, you look at Warner Brothers just bought Alloy. One of the reasons is Alloy's has this corner on youth. Smosh is number 3 on YouTube. Highly, highly interactive audience. Alloy more or less owns Smosh. Now Warner Brothers owns it. So you can see it happening. You can see, but the innovation is not going to come. I mean, NBC and Bravo, they can be as innovative as they can, but they're still the slave to the ratings and to the shareholder, ultimately to shareholder value. Mm-hmm. So true experimentation and true disruption can't happen there. So it will happen in YouTube, and it will happen in one respect when you can activate that interactive protocol layer that's on top of internet protocol distribution. So I say it's when Netflix meets Evernote.
Well, before I mention my second point, I think an important moment was a few years ago in the writers' strike. And I remember hearing everybody thinking, all right, I'm done with this, like Tim Kring and Herschel Moskowitz. What's his name? I can never, Herschel, what's his name?
Now you threw it right out of my mind. Marshall Herskowitz.
Marshall Herskowitz. And there were some people in Hollywood who said, okay, fine, I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to launch my own show outside of the system.
Different time.
Different time.
Didn't understand the medium, didn't understand the audience.
But it was early and it was important.
It was early, it was important. Social wasn't what it is now.
I want to make my point, okay. Which is, some writers said, oh, fine, I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to get a team around me. I'm going to start doing this. Some were successful. Tim's still moving forward. But not enough writers took up that opportunity. I'm still waiting to see more writers.
You
and
have
they're getting
Anthony
involved more.
You have Anthony Zeiger, who has Cybergeddon on YouTube. You have Tom Hanks with Electric City. You have John Woo with a new project.
You know who was here yesterday also is not someone who's famous, who worked in Hollywood. There was someone who was disrupting the system. That guy Joe Penna with the spiky black hair yesterday, Mystery Guitar Man, he's breaking that system. He has hundreds of millions of views, although, did you meet him?
I did not.
Well, tomorrow, you guys check out him online. He's creating a whole a universe of experience around YouTube and annotations, the interactive layer on top of on YouTube, and he's creating a huge community around him and his micro stories that he tells every week.
Right.
I just wanted to point him out. He was here yesterday.
You can look at Machinima. They're the #1 channel, I think, on YouTube. You really have to watch the groundswell. It's a combination of broadcast media from the top down and from the bottom up. But every day we deal with, we're flying by the seat of our pants. My client's in the room, but he knows that when we fly by the seat of our pants, we actually deliver. But you have to go back constantly. Like we're working right now with one of the networks on between season initiative, and they said, well, in order to play, you're going to have to make this $20 million media buy. Well, we're not going to make a $20 million media buy, but we're going to give you something that's really valuable to the audience that no one else, none of your other partners are going to pay for. You'd be foolish not to take this because your audience is sitting out there waiting for something to do around the content that they love. With Touch, I don't know if you watch Touch. The first week after Touch aired, there was this flutter on the internet. Where is the Teller Foundation online? Because it was included, and people know Tim. And they were like, where is this stuff? Where we want to play? Where's the world? Where can we enter? And it didn't exist.
Well, I know that one of the biggest challenges in the multi-platform interactive storytelling space, we won't use that other word.
Well, I can tell you why we won't use the other word, because let me stop you for a second.
Okay.
Because transmedia, when people talk about transmedia, they're talking about a story playing out across multiple platforms. And first of all, the definition has gotten so mangled.
Close your mouth.
The definition has gotten so mangled that nobody knows what it is anymore. And when transmedia producers or people who claim to be transmedia producers come and pitch to us, they're like, and then you have this and this and this. And we say, well, how are you going to pay for that? What's your business model? How are you going to drive your audience from one platform to the other? And they don't have the answer. So consequently, Hollywood, the people who have the money, are not investing in that. The answer is coming from the cloud anyway, and to not multiple cross-platform devices, but the devices that are actually part of people's lifestyles. It's hard to drive an audience behavior that doesn't exist. It's hard to teach new patterns of behavior, which is what transmedia tries to do. That's why Heroes was so successful. That's why with Conspiracy for Good, we watch the way the audience behaves, and then we institutionalize that behavior. That is not transmedia. That is multi-platform exploitation, if you want.
That's very specific to each platform, correct?
No, because
what's more successful, specific apps that do different things, or
Okay,
an
well,
app
I
that's
want you to
responsive?
look ahead for a second.
Okay.
You're living in the present, and I get how important that is.
Okay.
But in the future, so much stuff is going to come down from the cloud. We're seeing technologies that enable a similar experience across multiple devices. So it blows 10 foot, 3 foot, 1 foot out of the water, because basically the activity that you would do to become part of the story world, to interact with other people in the story world, is available across multiple devices. So just like Netflix, where you stop watching it on your TV and you pick it up on your phone, you'll be able to have that same persistent experience. And the things that the story world does, like I looked at what Mike presented yesterday, and clearly what they built for Stephen King's for that series, that could live on any platform. People could come in and play it in any way. You're not saying, okay, now it's a very small percentage of the audience that's going to allow themselves to be gamified, if you will, where, okay, and now, Tracy, you can run to the specific experience that we've created for the Xbox, or you can run to the specific experience to tie it all into one story.
So what's more
I have no passion about this.
What's more
by the way.
effective? And Mike, maybe you should jump in. What's more effective? Putting an experience that's the same on every platform where they can pick it up, delivering a unified experience across the cloud where they can pick it up wherever they want to, or an individual experience?
You're trying to, before Mike answers, you are
Okay.
trying to shove this into a box.
I'm asking a
I
question.
know, you're trying to
Okay.
templatize it. And
all right.
the question isn't what's effective. The question is, how valid is the story world? It's not the tech. What you're talking about is the technology driving the story. That's the wrong way. It's that story drives technology, and that's the way the audience does it. And technology enables the story. That's why we talk about informed collaboration. That's why Lisa, instead of designing where I throw you as a storyteller the technology and say, now you have to figure this out and use it, I work with you. And I say, okay, we had an amazing brainstorming session between Kring and Intel and an application provider, where Tim was now informed about the technologies that were at his disposal, and he got all excited and came back with a proposal. So the technology does not drive the story. If anything, there needs to be informed collaborations. And I just go back to Nathan Sendroff to remind you that it was the storytellers that created all the interfaces we use today, not the technologists. Thank you.
Okay.
Not to make you wrong, I'm
Let
just
me
saying
talk.
you can't
That's
come
okay.
from the...
No, I was just trying to clarify something. I'm not saying I buy into any of this, these types of methodologies,
Sorry,
but I
Mike.
wanted to clarify something and get a sort of quick response about what's something technologically is more effective or a more efficient way for the story world people, the storytellers, to tell a story. All right, forget it. Delete. But
No, don't.
all right. What I also want to ask, though, is telling a story from one to many. Now it's telling a story across many different platforms. But now I think there is a very interesting new model, and I invited Tracy here in the audience to represent that. Tracy Evans, who's a company called Theatrics. I'm very interested in the movement towards crowdsourced storytelling, which is part of what Tim and all of these people have been doing. But he's built a platform. He didn't pay me to do this. He's not a sponsor. But it's a platform where the audience is telling the story based on some certain key plot points.
So what he's doing...
What do you think about all of
well,
that?
I
Do you
think
it's
it can
exciting
be done,
or not? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, so I think the opportunity is there. I think not, and I love and respect Will Wright, but when they did Bar Karma, the reason Bar Karma didn't work was because they didn't establish the rules of the story world. And so there was no place for the audience to go. They didn't know how they would behave. What they're doing is they're setting up missions. They're establishing the rules of this town. They're establishing the rules of the story world. They don't know enough about it to know about the curation of content and how that's done. But I think it's possible. But the thing that really, really works is when there's a singular vision from the storyteller. And the singular vision creates the story world, and other people take up that vision. And the story world actually transforms from just becoming a story world, it transforms into a movement.
Well, that's Star Trek. That's right back to Star Trek.
So, but I think if the rules of a story world are highly defined and the audience knows what the behaviors of the story world is, that first of all, they can change the rules all they want, but the rules are still there. They can create the alternate universe, they can create slash fiction, they can do whatever they want, but the canons and the rules and the tropes are still there, and the behavior is still there. That, you know what? Our story world in the United States is the Constitution. That's the rules that set up our story world. And for the last 200 and some odd years...
Well, it's a mission statement. It's a mission statement. Which
yes,
is,
but the rules of our behavior of the story world. And we fight, and different stories, 200 and some odd years of history, have played out across the country in different regions, but everybody knows the story world that we're living in.
I absolutely love that metaphor, and I think that's a brilliant observation. Here's my question, and then I've got to go introduce the next session. I'm sorry I can't take Q&A. Maybe you should take it, okay?
I can do that if people...
maybe Mike, and if
I
you
don't know
want
if there's something
if you want to
after
invite
in this room.
anybody up on, well, I'm suggesting this is your session. But, all right, I got to close. What was my next... What did I say before? What did I say?
The Constitution.
Oh, my question is, and then I'm going to leave you, can we move forward with interactive story worlds by setting it up and not writing dialogue? Is the future of interactive multi-platform storytelling a bullet-pointed list, a statement, a mission statement? Is that the future? I'm going to leave that to you. And you, and all of you. Thank you.
I still think you need characters to identify with in order to create the world. So my Twitter is @BrianSethHurst, and you can direct message me or info@opmanagement.com. So I don't know if there's something else in this room. I'm happy to entertain questions. Yes, Mike.
Okay, so I just want to disagree slightly with the idea that story worlds are rules, because I think when you look at science fiction and fantasy literature, those have been very successful at building immense story worlds. So you take a book series like Game of Thrones, which is now a TV book series, has like food and the process of eating food and who eats what and how that food defines the characters is such a strong thread that people went and created cookbooks around the food of Game of Thrones, right? So it's about a level of detail and attention. It's about detail and attention in the storytelling process. And
But I think, but one rule gave rise to another set of canons, and I think that has value. I think we're actually talking about the same thing. So you're saying, yeah, there are rules, but the rules, it's more flexible than rules. It's foundation,
yes,
and then it's additive.
And it's about leaving room for the audience in the story, in the sense like that's what Star Trek did. You have the red shirts, but you have all these characters who are back there, and they all have rules, and they come in and they have a role, and then they leave, and people kind of they keep that. They understand the world is bigger than
So Mike and I are going to continue this discussion on StoryCentered on itvt.com because it's a great discussion. So I've been told I have to wrap up. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer in the lobby. So thanks.